So this year marks 25 years since the Renault Megane Coupe was launched here in the UK. My dad actually had one of the very first ones it would have been around May 1996. This particular car being a 1997 model. So nearly a quarter of a century on, how does the car compare? Well, when these were launched, they did look quite different, but they were really more evolution than revolutionary. So underneath the car is essentially, well, it shares quite a lot with its predecessor, the Renault 19. In fact, some say you may even trace its lineage back further to the Renault 11. Now, cars back in the 90s were generally felt a lot softer than what they do now. Mostly the wheels and tyres. Cars have got bigger, and as a consequence, so have the wheels and tyres. Thing is, big wheels and low profile tyres aesthetically look great, but when it comes to ride quality, cars can suffer a bit, and even getting in some modern cars that are perhaps not really a sports model, even then some of your regular passenger cars are still a lot firmer than what cars used to be, and it is easy to forget. So this Megane is actually a shorter wheelbase on the coupe, at least, than what you had on the Renault 19, and I think Renault actually did this for a good reason, which we will come to later. But in spite of that, first thing I notice is how smoothly the car actually rides. Now, engine wise, the car is actually this is a 1.68 valve, 90 horsepower, with about 137 newton meters of torque, which comes in at around 4,000 revs, and peak horsepower about 5.5. This engine was actually intended to be Renault's bread and butter engine for this car, and it's the 1.6e, so efficiency was in mind. So the idea being the car has more low to mid-range pull, but in all honesty, it's compared to a modern car, it will pull okay, especially with a light load lower down the range. I mean, at the moment I'm travelling around 50 mile an hour in fifth gear, a little over 2,000 revs, and the car's quite happy. Likewise around town, the car will pull at about 1,500 RPM. But to actually get any real performance, you really have got to let the revs rise. And cruising around a small village like what we're coming into now, car ride's really nice. Steering is power assisted but hydraulic. Feel actually isn't too bad. It's fairly light around town. Certainly forward visibility and from the sides is pretty good. Rear visibility isn't too bad when you're driving around, although it can be a little bit compromised sort of manoeuvring when you're parking, for example. But yeah, for what was actually intended to be the sportier model of the Megane range, obviously it shared the platform with initially the hatchback, later the Scenic MPV, the Classic Saloon, and in some markets there was an Estate as well. There was also a Cabriolet which looked very similar to the Coupe. But again, for what was intended to be quite a sporty car, I mean, now I'm just approaching some of these little speed humps, and when I'm in the 500 that kind of skips over them. This either straddles them, or in many instances it'll actually ride over really, really well. So I've actually seemingly picked one of the hottest days of the year to do this review in a car that hasn't got any air conditioning. Obviously I want you to be able to hear me, so I've got the windows closed and I've got the sunroof slightly ajar, but as it gets hotter I may actually have to open that up fully. It can be a bit uncomfortable in the hottest of weather, but in most conditions with the sunroof open, you do get a reasonable amount of airflow coming through. Now the suspension isn't the only thing that's surprisingly comfortable in this car. I mean, yeah, the French were known for making cars that could handle quite well, but that also have a comfortable ride. But the seats in this car are incredible, actually. It's almost as if they're made to measure for me. Head restraint is adjustable for both high and tilts forward. The sports seats in this model they're not actually too slim, and the bolsters are sort of supportive where you need them to be. But just the way the seats are sprung, you really can get comfortable in these seats. And even after longer journeys, I had a ride to the coast a few weeks ago, and even after an hour and a half, still incredibly comfortable. And it's not just for the front seats as well, even for rear seat passengers. Although space is a little bit at a premium back there, the bucketed seats are actually incredibly comfortable, and you almost sort of sink down into position in them. So like I said, this engine does actually quite like to rev, and there, just 3,500–4,000, you feel the car really sort of start to come alive. Now it's by no means fast. You've got a 0–60 of around 11 seconds, which even in period wasn't fast, but it was quick enough. And you have to remember, this is actually the smallest engine of the coupe range. But yeah, the little 8-valve engine really sort of howls when you let the revs rise. So steering, again, it does get a little bit lighter, being that it's a hydraulic system rather than electronic. As you go quicker, it will start to get a little bit lighter. But in spite of that, it's still quite accurate. Just like Lancia did with the Stratos, that had a really short wheelbase, quite a wide track, and it made for a car that really did change direction, that could dart around. And the Megane's the same. It's quite happy in these tight bends to change direction. The steering is surprisingly precise, even for a 24-year-old car. I know it's going to get a bit noisier, but I'm going to open that roof because it is getting absolutely stifling in here. It's only 9:30 and the temperature is probably already up into the 30s. You do get this nice little deflector up here as well that pops up, so it does help keep wind noise down. Air conditioning was actually available as an option on this model, but sadly one that wasn't ticked when the vehicle was new. So here we're approaching the level crossing. Now, my 500 on 15-inch wheels is fairly compliant for a modern car, but in that you do kind of skip over level crossings and sort of grit your teeth. But here, second gear, 20 miles per hour, and this is certainly one of the less level crossings, and I barely felt it. But where the Megane really entertains is when you get onto a twisty section of B road like this. Provided you keep it in that sort of 3,500–4,500 revs, just keeps things alive, and the engine's got a real fizz to it. Just a bit of light braking, just enough to load the nose, keeps that front end, but there is a bit of body roll compared to a modern car. I don't know if that's just by design or if that's more a result of the car's age. I mean, the car has been to a garage, it's been inspected, everything looked as it should be with the shocks and other components. I have also replaced the anti-roll bar bushes, which were completely shot on this car. But again, even with that body roll, the level of grip, it just, you push a bit harder and it never seems as though it's going to run out of grip. For a car that's on relatively small wheels and tyres as well, On the 1.6 and 2 litre 8 valves, you was on 14 175s or 185s. So by today's standard, a really, really small tyre. So that blip of the throttle, the revs come up, that turn in. The car just seems to want you to push. I would love to experience what one of the Maxi Megane rally cars was like. Obviously with a much wider track, and they was based around the 2 litre 16 valve F7R, the legendary Clear Williams engine. Same engine was also used in the Renault Spider. Sure, with 90 horsepower, this is never going to keep up with a 200 horsepower hatchback in a straight line. But when I've been out with car clubs through the twisty bends, it's surprising this car does actually hold its own for a 24-year-old car with not a lot of power. It just eats up the bends. Sure, you could drive a Megane Coupe on a longer journey. You could take it on a motorway, and you are talking over 3,500 revs at 70 miles an hour. But it will do it in reasonable comfort. That's just how cars were of that era. But where you're really going to enjoy the car most is when you get on to some twisty B roads. Obviously this car was available with ABS as an optional extra, but again, one that was seldom spec'd. This particular version is on disc brakes at the front, ventilated discs, and drum brakes at the rear. And for the most part, they are okay. They're not perhaps not the strongest you'll ever encounter, but they're sufficient as long as you're not pressing too hard. I'm not one for excessively heavy braking, but I did find something recently when I was in a position where I did actually have to brake a little bit harder than I might usually. Now, the braking system on this car has a valve, sort of a load sensing valve, whereas if you've got a couple of passengers, luggage in the back, and the car's heavier, it will allow more brake fluid to the rear end of the car, to the drums. And obviously when there's less load in the car at the back, it will put more braking force to the front of the car. Idea being it stops you locking up the rear end and inducing a skid. Now the problem is if you brake really heavy, all that weight is transferred to the front, and as that weight is transferred to the front of the vehicle, the valve then allows more braking force to the front to stop the wheels locking up, but effectively it will put so much to the front of the car that it will actually cause the front of the car to dive. So thus loading up the front end, but making the rear end of the car incredibly light. Again, it's not a major issue. It doesn't have to be dangerous, but if it's something you're unaware of, and in an emergency you stamp on the brakes, if you're not cadence braking, perhaps you're steering to avoid something, it could cause the back end of the vehicle to step out. That turning even doesn't matter whether you're doing 30 mile an hour or 60 mile an hour, even at a junction, that turning every time, it kind of surprises you how sharp the steering is on this car. So red line's at 5,750, limiter will actually cut in for you at 6,000. Pedals are just nicely enough space to toe and heel. And for a car that doesn't have much power, well, it's not particularly heavy either, and it does actually get up to speed pretty quickly when you want it to, but you will have to work it to get that torque. Try and accelerate hard from lower revs, it will pick up, but it's not going to be a very quick experience. So should you buy one? Well, absolutely, if you can find one. This being a phase 1 car is much rarer. You could perhaps find a phase 2 car. On paper, in many ways, the better. They're all 16 valve engines. There's certainly a lot more equipment. I don't think they look as good. That's just my personal opinion. Also, I know that the 1.4 and 1.6 16 valve engines in the phase 2 cars with the coil on plug are prone to coil packs failing. This old 8 valve unit is actually HT coils, so you've got 2 coil packs on top of the engine with your 4 HT leads feeding out to your spark plugs. So what we have here is a 1997 Renault Megane Coupe 1.6e Fidji. So shares its platform with the rest of the Renault Megane range. Initially it was a coupe and a 5-door hatchback. Later on the range was expanded. That included the Scenic MPV, the Classic Saloon, the Convertible, which looked very similar to the coupe, and there was also in some markets an Estate, but we didn't get that here in the UK. So when Renault moved from the 19, the design of the Megane was very much more curves. Everything's elliptical, and being a pre-facelift car, you can see that really here, even in these lamps, everything's got curves everywhere. From the round fog lamps, the oval grille, the curvy indicators. This beak design, which we first saw something very similar on the Laguna a few years earlier, but that sort of stopped part way down. But it's not just there. Even in these windows, we've got this curve that kinks up. In this rear glass here, again, it's all one big curve. And it's the same story around the back too. On the coupe models, we've got these big round lamps on the back, and then this big oval shape that carries around here. Even the spoiler, when you look from the top, has got this curvature all the way around. So I have here the press release from 1997 for the Fidji model. So as I say, there was 3 models at launch in the coupe range. It was a little bit different with the other variants. So with the coupe, the models were derived by engine size. So you had the 1.6e, which was your entry level car, which is what this is loosely based around. You also had a 2 litre, which was also an 8 valve unit like this one. That produced about 115 horsepower. There was the range topper, which was the 2 litre 16 valve, and that was the F7R engine, which was found in the Clio Williams. This 1.6 litre engine produces about 90 horsepower, but by today's standards it's not a lot, but in its day it was quite sufficient for a car that didn't really weigh too much. So this is dated January 97, so at this point the car's been out in France just over a year, and we're looking at coming up to a year in the UK. So the car's been selling reasonably well, despite a strike at the factory, which did actually cause some issues with production. But yeah, Renault released this special edition Fidji. So we've got the 1.6 litre engine, but we've got a lot of extras on this car. So the standard 1.6s, they actually came with steel wheels and wheel trims as standard. They also had blanking plates in place of these front fog lamps. This particular car is painted in sunflower yellow. Sunflower yellow at launch was only available on cars fitted with 2 litre engines. So if you wanted a 1.6e, sorry, but couldn't have a yellow one. They've retained the black plastic mirror housings on these. All 1.6s had these, I think with the exception of the Sport 2, which came quite late. But all 2 litre cars got colour-coded mirrors. That's one way you can set this car apart. So you can also tell this model by the 1.6e badging and the wheels. Now the wheels, it's listed on here somewhere, Etretat wheels. Now these were found on the RXE model of the hatchback. I think there may have been an option, but that was the range topping car. But as I say, on the Fidji model got these wheels as well. Still a standard size, 14 inch. The only car that had larger wheels, incidentally, was the 2 litre 16 valve, which had 16 inch Dinards on. I don't know how much difference that made to how the car drives. Obviously I would expect it would make it quite a bit firmer. So things like this curvy boot spoiler, these was actually on these phase 1 cars only standard equipment on this Fidji model or the range topping 2 litre 16 valve. Even the 2 litre 8 valve didn't get the spoiler. And the car did actually look quite good without them, quite a smooth shape, but I must admit it does give it a little something extra, and obviously because it's not too ridiculously large, it's still fairly subtle, but it just sets the back of the car off really nice. These early cars as well, we got these fog lamps into the number plates surround. That changed with the phase 2 cars when they had different lamp clusters fitted. So it says here on this press release, featuring £1,350 worth of additional equipment to enhance the style, comfort, performance and safety. I'm not sure what they added to this car that made it any safer, because it's still got one driver's airbag, still not got any ABS. So it was £355 more at new than what the entry-level 1.6e car was. So the Fidji, it says here, represents a customer saving of £995 and is available from January 1997. This car was actually built in February and registered in April of that year. So unique specification, it says 12,995 on the road. Externally, the car is distinguished by body colour rear spoiler, front fog lamps, as can be found on the 2 litre 16 valve version. Etretat alloy wheels, yes, we've already covered all of that. So there was more as well, but I think a lot of that was internally. It's also available with a 4-speed automatic, though I can't imagine what that'd be like. I would think probably very slow. Anti-lock braking system, passenger airbag, air conditioning, metallic paint was all optional extras. So what we have here in this particular version is the 1.68 valve. So as I've mentioned previously, we've got coil on plug on this particular engine. 1598 cc's, normally aspirated. Obviously the beauty of this engine is how much space there is to work on. Perhaps not so much the case if you go for one of the 2 litre engine cars. So in addition to our coupe badge, we've also got Fidji. Should be one on both doors, but this car seems to have lost one over its years. So one real surprise with these cars is the tailgate, because you expect a hatchback. We've got a rear wiper here, this sloping glass looks like a hatchback. But in reality, it's actually a proper coupe. All this behind here is a solid steel sheet structure. You do have folding back seats though, so it does give you a little bit more space to put larger items through. Surprisingly, there's actually a fair amount of space in here once you get through the gap. Obviously I've got a few items in there, but it's a reasonable size. We've also got a full-size steel spare wheel underneath the floor there as well, which is definitely something nice that you don't see on a lot of modern cars now. So we talked about that elliptical design. That's something that's carried on again here inside in this door car. These big curves everywhere, the door handles, these speaker grills, everything's all elliptical. Even down to these dash vents and the centre of the dash, everything's all curves. So we talked about the extra equipment on the Fidji that's found. We looked around the outside. There is some additional equipment inside as well. So we've got electrics pack. The base model 1.6 cars didn't come with electric windows. They were available as an option, but they had no sunroof, no electric windows, and manually adjustable door mirrors. So this car's obviously got electric front windows, fixed rears. There were some of the 2 litre cars did have pop-out windows, and a lot of the phase 2 cars did as well. So we've got electric heated door mirrors as well. And we also benefited from, as part of the pack, we got smart wipers. So we got a rear wipe that sweeps when you put the car in reverse if the front wipers are on. Bear in mind, this is the late 90s. These things we take for granted now weren't really available that much on cars back then. We've also got an intermittent, a variable intermittent front wiper. So it means we've got an additional collar on here with multiple settings as you twist it round, and it alters the delay between the where the wipers sweep when they're on intermittent mode. Again, something that probably sounds trivial now, but I remember cars in the late 90s. I mean, my first car didn't even have an intermittent wipe, and then when I did get a car with an intermittent wipe, it weren't variable. It was another car after that before I got that. So that's a really useful feature. Delay courtesy lights, exterior temperature gauge, which in this car seems to, on a day like today, tells me it's 40 degrees. It's probably about 30 in reality. And the electric tilt and slide sunroof, which has been an absolute godsend. Controls which are all up here on this centre console, along with the main interior light and a swivel map light. There's also lighting in the rear as well, which is obviously set on the same time delay. We'll start with the back of the car because this is an area which to me is always a bit of a surprise. Now, these seats are supremely comfortable if you look at the bucketed shape. As they come up the seat back, we've got a 60-40 split there, and we've got an integrated headrest. They are a little bit short, but still very shapely. And two large pods leading off behind there that echo the elliptical shape of the hood cover on the convertible models, and on some versions we had speakers built in there as well. As I say, we've got our interior light back there as well. And something I really like about this car, obviously, is two seats in the back as opposed to three. And between the two seats, Renault have integrated this storage, so you've got a little bit of a tray on top there for your sandwiches. And we've got this storage box which just so happens to be the perfect size for your cassette tapes. Because, yep, this car was built in the 90s and it has a radio cassette. Some versions were available with an optional CD multi-changer if you so wished. So again, we've got that elliptical shape there, space to stick your elbows. It's like I say, it's quite comfortable back here. We've also got some little storage cubbies there as well. The headliner is slightly sculpted there, just allowing a little bit more room, although you do tend to find you sit with your head a bit further back. I'm around 5'9" and I can sit upright quite comfortably in the back of here. What I do struggle with though is leg room. Now, with the seat set in the position for me as the driver, yeah, you're not going to have a lot of space there, anyone in the back. So really I think of this as a three-seat car, unless of course the driver happens to be exceptionally short. There's elliptical shaped vents. So also, along with this wiper stalk behind there, as you can just see, is our radio fingertip remote control. Now again, something we take for granted today, but Renault have been doing this since the 1980s on their luxury models, and by the 90s it was starting to expand to higher spec models such as the higher end Clios, and by the late 90s into the 2000s it was on every model in the range. A really useful safety feature. So starting on the right here, we've got our Rev Counter, which in the 8-valve cars reads to 7,000 with a red line of 5,750, which the electronic limit are cutting in at 6,000 on this one. 150 mph speedometer, and in this car we have got a LCD readout for the mileage and trip, and on when you put the key in the ignition, actually shows the oil as well. Got our immobiliser light flashing up there, and so we have temperature warning lights, and next to it there would be the fuel. So fuel and temperature gauge there on the left, and gauges made by Jaeger. So as we come across to the left here into the centre, we've got warning lights for doors open. We've also got a seatbelt warning light. Got our digital clock and a very optimistic, it's probably not all that far off, temperature gauge. To the left there, we've got our Rds Radio Display. Again, separate high-level displays were around in the 90s, but they weren't common. And earlier versions of the 1.6 of this car had a smaller display that just gave a radio preset. This one actually gives the radio station detail as well. Likewise, that display in the Speedo for the mileage, the very first cars had the old tumbler wheels as opposed to an LCD readout. So as we come down, we've got our 2 vents in the centre. To the right, we've got the hazard warning lights and button for the central door locking. There are no buttons on the doors for the door locks. So to lock or unlock the car from inside, it's that rocker switch in the middle. To the side of that, we've got our radio cassette, which in this version is a 2x8 watt system. 2 litre car's got a 4x15 watt with speakers at the back. Below there are ventilation, these nice rotary controls which still feel pretty crisp even today. We've got an air recirculator system, and some models would have had another button below that which would have been for your air conditioning. To the right is our heated window. Now, this is a car from the 90s, which means we don't have any cup holders, or not any usable ones anyway. We do have plenty of ashtrays though, so we've got one in the front, which I'm using for keeping number plate screws at the moment. A little storage cubby below that, in front of our gear lever. So looking across to the left, we've got this empty hole here. And what could go in there? Well, in this one it's a bit of a shelf, but in some models, well in fact I think it was optional on all these phase ones, would have been your passenger airbag. Yep, drivers get an airbag, only one though, no side airbags, but the passengers had to die like men because an airbag was an option. So we're talking about cup holders. We have actually got provision in this glove box lid for a small tea shelf here. So you've got what I would think is probably a sunglass holder in the middle, and these 2 little indentations to the side. Now I have tried a regular soft drink can in there, and it was, well, even static, it was not particularly stable. So I wouldn't put a lot of faith in it, and I certainly wouldn't be using it to put your drink in while you're mobile. A reasonable size illuminated glove box as well. And just coming back to the rear again, some models, as I say, would have had pop-out rear windows, so they would have had electric window switches down here at the back. As it happens, this one doesn't have electric windows. Doesn't have a cup holder there either. One thing they did have in the 90s, as mentioned, was plenty of ashtrays. So, got another one there in the back, meaning that both you, your wife, your mistress and your girlfriend can all have a cigarette at the same time, and nobody's short of an ashtray. Of course, on a day like today, you will all dehydrate as you've nowhere to put your drink. If you've enjoyed this review of the Megane, take a look back through the playlist. There's lots of videos of work that's been carried out on this car, and there'll probably be more to come. Also, now that the car's back on the road, I'll be attending some shows, so again, click the subscribe button, click the bell notification, that way you'll find out whenever I post a video. There was actually a really good show yesterday, the Walton Classic Car Show, and as I say, there will be plenty more to come. Thank you so much for watching. Till next time, bye for now.